It's another evening after work, and I haven't got a lot done in the last couple of days. I've still been puzzling over these door latches, and I think I've come to the conclusion that my idea of having the handle up here, which is where it was on some of the originals, isn't going to work with these latches. So I've decided to simplify it, and I'm just going to have a simple arm and a little pocket in the door, in the door card here, that you can just get to and work the latch. I did play with, I've been 3D printing little linkages to test out, and the problem is because this operates from the back and not from the side, there's no easy way for me to get the right motion on this so that a simple arm will activate the latch. You'd need a bell crank and all sorts of things. It started getting way too complicated, so I've gone back to nice, simple, unobtrusive. There'll just be a little arm like that and a little cutout in the door pocket, and it's pretty easy to get your fingers down the edge of the door just to lift it up. The other problem I found though is these are, well, this is a 6mm hex, but it's not a very accurate 6mm. So a 6mm Allen key, which is what I chopped up to make the little actuator, has slop. You might be able to see. That's a lot of slop before it even starts moving the mechanism. So the actual mechanism only needs it's a little bit more than that. I'm hitting the limits there of my little steel block. So I think what I'll do is I will mill up my own little hex bar. I know somebody will say, oh, it's probably not 6mm, it's probably 1/4 inch, but it isn't, because a 1/4 inch Allen key won't fit in there, it's too tight. So that should be easy enough. Simple little bar, nice and simple. I think that's what I'm going to go with. And on the advice of someone who actually owns one of these cars, they suggested leaving out the door straps, the little thing to stop the door opening too far, because the doors are very light, so there isn't much danger of them getting away from you. And also it's very handy to be able to open the doors all that way so that you can work on bits in the car and under the instrument panel or behind the instrument panel. So I'm going to go with that advice and just leave them off. Again, just simplifying things. So I think that's all I can do for tonight. It's getting a little bit late. Sometimes you just have to work through all the options of these things and end up going back to the simplest option. A couple of people did suggest cable pulls, and I did actually look at that, and somewhere, I can't remember where they are now, I do have, oh, they're in here somewhere. There's too much stuff. Somewhere I did actually have cable pull type latches, but I don't know that they use them on Riley. It always makes me think of minis, early minis, which are a bit too late period-wise. Apparently Jaguars use them as well. I think it was the SS100 Jags use them, but I think I'll just go with what I've got here. It'll be nice and neat. It's mechanically simple and it works. So that's a shame. My nice little handles I got for nothing, but I'm sure I can find some other use for those. And I'm still waiting for the aluminium to come to start doing some of the firewall stuff. Oh, the other really important thing I've completely forgotten to mention is I got my paperwork from the Vintage Car Club, who provided me with what's called a DOMAS, which I can't remember what it actually stands for, but it's basically a document that says this car is a replica of a 1930s Riley Brooklands, and it sets out what category of car it is within the Vintage Car Club rules, which tie into the low volume certification rules, so that it is officially a scratch built historic replica, which is what the LVVTA call it. And with that document, I have now confirmed I should be able to get the VIN plate for it, which I need to get, at least get the VIN number in the system before the certifier can do his part. And then once the certifier has done his part, it goes for what I believe is called entry certification, which is like a New Zealand warrant fitness check, but slightly more strict. I think it's similar to the sort of test they would do on a car that's being imported. And basically, once that's done, it gets it's registered in the system. So I know I'm a little way away from that. I do need to finish the car, of course, but there's enough of it here that they can see exactly what it is. It's really now it just needs the skin and the guards and the wiring and the petrol tank and the fuel lines, and floors and bonnet. So there's still actually quite a lot to do, but the basic car is here now, so I was able to get that document, which was good. One thing I just realised I'd forgotten to do is they will need some sort of identification on the chassis, but being a replica chassis, of course it doesn't have one, which means I can stamp it with my own. So normally that would go on the front dumb iron down here. I believe they only stamp one side. So I'll just need to confirm with them what's suitable for that, and then I can basically give the chassis my own identity, its own identity. So that was quite a good thing to have done. At the same time, I got what's known as a VIC, a vehicle identity card, for my MGB, which just basically shows that it's a vintage car club eligible vehicle. In New Zealand, to be eligible, for a vehicle to be eligible, it has to be over 30 years old. So I've been able to do that for a while. I just never really bothered. But one of the reasons I did that is because they keep talking about it. Some people I've talked to say it's never going to happen. Other people think it will. At the moment in New Zealand, an older car has to go for a warrant of fitness, which is like the old British MOT test, every 6 months. And it's really annoying, especially for a car like the MGB, which doesn't have a lot of mileage. So every 6 months I have to take it to the garage and he does the inspection. So they have been talking about changing the rules so that classic cars that are recognised as classic cars, and one of the ways they do that is if it's Vintage Car Club registered, would only have to go for that check once a year. So it's the main reason I did that. I don't know when that's supposed to happen. It's one of these things where you hear, yeah, it's going to happen, and then it doesn't. And then things change and they go back to the beginning. My mechanic doesn't think it's ever going to happen. We'll see. But yeah, at least we're getting closer with this one. The funny thing is, with this car, because even though it's an old car, technically in the system it'll be a new car, and I don't think I'll have to get a warrant of fitness for the first 3 years because it's a new vehicle. When it goes into the system here, will get effectively a double date. So it will be registered as a replica 1930 Riley Brooklands, and it'll have a date of 1930/2023, 2024, whenever I actually get it done. So yeah, definite progress. Back on to clocks. I think I mentioned that I saw another one of these clocks come up for sale for a good price, so I grabbed it. And this one's a Smith's. This is a Jaeger, but I can't remember the exact history, but Smith's and Jaeger in the UK at least, one bought the other at some point. So often you'll see the same thing but branded differently, and I was pretty certain there was a good chance that this clock would have exactly the same mechanism as this one. So you can already see there are similarities in the housings and the back plate and the winding knob, bits and pieces like that. So I've already taken the screws out of this one. The back on it was already broken. I knew that before I bought it. But if we get this open, you can see they're very similar. Possibly not exactly the same, but pretty close, I would say. Oh, yeah. So this one doesn't go. I'll basically do the same thing I did with this one, give it a good clean up. I'll take the face off to avoid damaging that. There are differences on this, the way the face works, so maybe they are different. It's hard to tell, but if one mechanism is better than the other, then I can sort of, if I can get one working, I think I can mix and match the rest of the parts. You know, for example, I can change the faces around and the hands around and things like that. I'm pretty sure they'll be similar enough that works. But I think the first thing to do is clean this one up, and after a good clean, see if this runs. It didn't seem to have the same sort of wear as the other one in some of these gears. There's no sideways motion on them like there is on the other one. So we'll see how it goes. They're just quite fun to play with as well. So taking the new clock apart, you find that they are similar but different. So I think the general arrangement is the same. You're going to have the same number of gears and the same mechanisms and things, but there are definitely differences. You can see in the face plates, you can see the way the dial is attached to this one. There's a separate plate that it screws to rather than sitting up on these little bent tabs. So I think now what I need to do is clean this mechanism and probably give it a bit of that clock oil and see if it works. I have found if you give it a little kickstart, I did manage to get it to run just for a little bit, but we'll see how it goes. But like I say, if this mechanism is good, I can put this mechanism onto this base, and I'm not sure how it would work with the faces. These are the same height. And then how it works with mixing and matching the dials and the bezels. I think the outer casings are similar, but the bezels are different styles. So interesting. I think it's going to be a little bit like with the tachometer, where there was a little bit of mixing and matching of parts to try and get one that works. But yeah, it's interesting to see the similarities but differences. Makes you wonder how many models of these they actually made. Is it because, are these from the same era? Are they different eras? I don't know. I might have a look online and see if I can find any history about these things. This one, the first one, definitely had a number on it. I don't know that. Oh, this one does, but it's just a whoops serial number, I think. Yeah. Back out in the shed after work. I think I mentioned, pretty sure I mentioned, I'm not going to do the door handles up on the doors here, because with these lock mechanisms that I've got, I can't get the linkages right to do it, because the actuating arm comes out the back and moves up and down. And unless I wanted to build things with bell cranks and all sorts of levers and arms, it's just too complicated. So what I'm going to do instead is just have the little lever on the inside down here and just have a little cutout in the door card. I think that's going to be the simplest way. I've got one of the locks over here. The little hex head here it's kind of an odd size. So this is a 6mm Allen key I chopped up, and it's loose. So of course the first thought is then it's not 6mm, it's 1/4 inch, but a 1/4 inch won't go through it, it's too tight. So in order to get rid of the lost motion, because there's sort of quite a bit of lost movement in there before the latch even moves, I thought I would get some 1/4 inch hex brass bar to make the little piece that actually goes into the lock mechanism. And turns out that's quite hard to find. I did find some eventually at a model engineering supply type place locally. So I've got that on the way. I'll have to file it just slightly so it actually fits tightly in there. But I also ordered some brass bar to make the little handle, and my plan is to silver solder those together and then nickel plate them. I think that should turn out quite neat. I have tried milling it, which is why my mill is covered in brass, but I think the problem is I was trying to mill lengthways and I don't have enough to support it this way, so my hexes always ended up crooked. I think if I was using this and just milling a short length and milling crossways, I'd probably get a much more accurate result. But in the end I thought I'll just see if I can buy some bar. So I still need to clean up the mill, obviously. Another thing is, I've mentioned before the problems I have with condensation in here. Everything ends up getting surface rust on it, and I have been wiping things down with slideway oil. You can sort of see the rust there. And that does work. I just have to remember to do it. And Mr. Tweed recommended this stuff, ACF 50, which is used in aircraft to stop those corroding. And usually when somebody overseas recommends something, you find you can't get it in New Zealand, you can't get it shipped, or it's really expensive. Turns out this stuff is locally available. It's reasonably pricey, but it's not ridiculous. And a little apparently goes a long way. It comes with a little spray bottle. So I'm going to give that a try on everything, based on Mr. Tweed's recommendation. I suspect he actually gets Jenkins to do reply to all the comments for him, but we'll give it a try and see what happens. And what else? This is how the clock turned out. It's kind of a mix and match of different parts that worked. So the base on the second clock was all warped and cracked, so that was no good. So I'm using the clock mechanism from the second clock, the base from the first one, the face and the hands from the first one, and the casing and the bezel from the second one. But these things are similar enough that you can mix and match the parts like this. And this one actually runs pretty well. I think there may be something wrong with the spring, because when you wind it all the way up, it gets under tension and then it sounds like it's slipping, but maybe they're supposed to work that way so you can't overwind them. I'm not quite sure, but you can definitely wind it up enough and it'll run. And it's been running now for a couple of days. I have wound it up since then. Unfortunately, it runs a little bit slow. I think it was about 5 minutes over a day, but for a vintage car where I'm not going to be using it every day, I think that'll work really well. And it's just nice to have it so that it does work. So if I do go on a trip in the car, chances are I'm going to have to wind the clock up anyway, so you can just adjust the time. And you don't need hugely accurate on it. It's just nice to know what time of the day it is. So that's come out pretty well, which means I should maybe start looking at my instrument panel and cutting some holes in it. So you can see the original clock I was going to use is much bigger, because it sort of swings out of the case and it's got a winder on the inside. So this clock will go sort of in there, and it turns out that the winding stem is exactly the right length just to poke out the bottom of the instrument panel. So I'm really pleased with how that came out. I've mentioned before I'd really like one of the aviation style time of trip clocks. They're very cool. They're also very expensive. I think I saw one for sale recently and it was £2,300, so about 5,000 New Zealand dollars. This second clock mechanism I got was about £20, so I'm quite happy to have saved some money there. And I need to chase up what's happening with my aluminium for this. It's on back order, so hopefully that arrives soon. Another interesting thing that happened was yesterday I went into town, I was on the train and I was reading my automobile magazine, and they take ages to get here and they're always out of date by the time they get here. But they have the auction news, and there was a Brooklands going up for auction, and I looked it up on my phone, and I was going to look it up again on my computer when I got home, but I'd forgotten. Yesterday the trains broke down, or rather the signals all broke down, and the train was delayed by an hour and a half. By the time I got home it was too late. So funnily enough, today somebody actually emailed me to say, hey, had you seen this? And I had. So that was my reminder to go in and look at the photos and grab a copy of them all. And this Brooklands, it's another one of these ones where it's described as an original Brooklands, which it is, but it's got a new body on it. I think the number on that one was 87, which is a strange number, but it is known that some of the Brooklands had either no numbers or odd numbers, not just 80 numbers, which most of them have. I think a couple of the early ones were 60 numbers, and then there's supposedly some with no numbers at all. But there were some good pictures with that car, including some of the original bits and pieces, which included the rear fuel tank mounting, and it's very similar to what I built here. Sort of timber cradles sitting at the back like that. So that was quite good. Obviously I was on the right track with that. And the other thing is, I think I mentioned as well that I had got the papers from the Vintage Car Club. I also had to get another document witness, so I did that yesterday when I was in town. And I have spoken to both the LVVTA, the low volume certifier people, and VTNZ, who are the normal certifier, not certifiers, the registration type people. So the car needs to go to both of them, but apparently what I need to do is finish the car, take it to VTNZ, who will then give me a VIN plate and actually attach the VIN plate to it, which gives me the number which gets it into the system. And then I can go to the low volume certifier, who will do his checks on it and certifications on it, and then it has to go back to VTNZ, who do the I believe they call it entry certification. So that gets it the actual registration and the number plate. Basically that's the final step to make it all legal. And then the last step is I go back to the Vintage Car Club and they issue me a it's called a VIC, which is a vehicle identity card, and then I'm done. So basically I just have to finish it now, or finish it as much as I need to be able to get it on the road. So I can probably not paint it and not do the upholstery until it's really I know I can get it on the road. So I think the next thing I can do is take the doors off and treat and stain those black so it matches the rest of the frame. And I think the tail can be done as well. I'm pretty sure I've got everything I need on that now. The only thing I wasn't sure about is the budget locks for the boot lid, which are these. And obviously there is a key, and there's just sort of an arm. Can I do it? that comes out. Very simple locks. But I think what I can do is when I make the boot lid, these can just be set on blocks inside the lid so that they close underneath here. I may put a little steel plate under there, but I can just screw that in place afterwards, and that's how those will work, because I'm pretty sure they go front and back. I don't think you would have them on the sides. But I don't need to do anything to the frame apart from maybe screw on the little steel plates. And then once that's all done, I guess I can start skinning it, which means I should probably look at ordering some steel. I also need to order, I think it's 1mm Zinc I need to make the petrol tank. It's either 1mm or 1.2, because that's what they specify in the constructor's manual. So originally they would have been soldered. I'm going to have to weld it. That's a good example of one of those things where I think the way they look at it is originally they were soldered, but there's no reason I can't weld it so that it matches the standard in the book. If I match the standard, there's nothing they can find wrong with it, as long as I build it properly, I guess. So it's just safer to do it the way they say to do it. Then everybody's happy. And functionally, it doesn't make any difference, of course. And if I build the tank in a particular way, I should be able to edge weld it all nicely so it doesn't leak. I'll also order probably 2mm aluminium, I think, for the under tray, which will have to be sort of bolted on everywhere. And I think I've got enough aluminium for the bonnet. And I guess I will do the Austin 7 style, or the style I used on my Austin 7 of bonnet hinges, where it's all integral to the hinge. So instead of using piano hinges, this part of the hinge is all actually built into the hinges. It's a lot of work. I've done it a couple of times now though, so I kind of know how that works, so it shouldn't be too bad for me to do that. And I still need to figure out cabling. The main cable from the battery will run up the passenger side of the car, somewhere up here. It has to go to the starter solenoid, and the fuel lines will run up the other side of the car, and I need to mount the fuel tap because I'm going to arrange it so that there is a reserve pickup in the tank as well as a main pickup, because there's no fuel gauge. So there'll be a fuel measuring stick, same as I've got in the Austin 7, but it's probably quite handy to have that reserve capacity there. Engine is done, pretty much. I've never actually tried filling it with coolant and running it with the water pump yet, so I may want to do that. And then of course at some point I'll have to strip the entire car down, so I can paint the chassis, and it'll be probably easier to do things like the under tray, screw that in place with the chassis without everything else on it. I can turn it upside down if I need to and do that, or I can hoist it up on my chain to lift it up so I can get underneath it easily. If it's just a bare chassis, it'll be easy to lift up like that. So I'm making progress. Also, I need to rebuild the headlamps, of course. I've got all the parts to do that, I just haven't actually got round to doing it yet. But yeah, I think we're getting there with it. It's been a very busy Saturday, mainly doing house stuff. I water blasted the outside of the house and the outside of the shed. I've put spider killing stuff on the outside of the shed. I'll do the house tomorrow. I washed some of the cars, including the MG. There's a sort of coffee and cars event on tomorrow morning at the local car museum, so I might pop out to that. In cleaning the car, I cleaned down the engine as well, and realised in the last year I've only done less than 500 kilometres in the car, so I really need to get out and use it a bit more. That's not my Honda Fit, but been just taking care of some surface rust on the bottom of that, which is why it's up on the ramps. I have removed the doors and the rear of the frame of the car and have treated those with the Metal X treatment. So I'll leave that to dry till tomorrow, and then tomorrow I'll start the black stain on those. My motorcycle tyres, which I only ordered yesterday, actually arrived this morning, which is pretty good. Tyres and inner tubes. They didn't sell the rim bands, so I had to buy those separately, and I also separately bought some sort of tyre lube stuff that you use to help fit the tyres. As well as the tyres, my aluminium angle showed up finally, so I can start looking at finishing off the inside of the firewall. And the other thing that arrived, for some reason, just the last couple of days, things have been arriving really quickly, was my brass hex bar, and I also got some 1/2 by 3/16, and I'm going to use that to make the little handles. And this is what I meant about these locks. So that's a 6mm Allen key, and it's sort of sloppy. This is 1/4 inch brass bar, and it's too big, it won't fit through. So I ended up just filing the flats just on a file like this, and that now means these fit in there quite nicely. So I've machined them down to length. I've turned the end round so that I can drill a suitable hole in the handle, and I will silver solder those together. I will have to mill a flat on here because on the inside of the lock the mechanism sticks up just a little bit, so it means I can't fit this all the way in. So I'll mill a little flat piece on the end, silver solder these in, and that'll make the handle. I don't know if I'll probably just leave them plain. I don't know, maybe I could drill holes in them or something just to make them a bit more interesting, but you'll barely see those anyway. And I'll probably nickel plate them just so they're not just brass. And that would be the handles done. So I think that's it. I have to get the little Honda off the ramps. The other thing I need to do now I've cleaned the MG is actually put on my Vintage Car Club sticker. So I think I'll do that next. So now it's officially a VCC registered car, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't really mean anything. I can enter VCC events with it now, I guess. Sunday today. I haven't done too much because I ended up going out this morning. Took the MG out, which is all covered up again now, and went to Southwoods Museum because they had a coffee and cars event on. I didn't bother filming anything there. It was quite windy, so it would have been a bit tricky. I probably should have taken my little action camera and used that, and then put captions over the top. But it was very busy. It was an interesting event. There were very few what I would call classic cars or hot rods, or very, very few pre-war cars. I think there were about 4. There was a Model T there, which I had a quick look at and then was going to go back and look at later, and it had disappeared. There was a BSA, 1938 BSA, I think it was. And most interestingly, there was a straight 8 Auburn, which I've never seen before. I've never seen them in New Zealand before. I didn't even know we had any. And I ended up chatting to the guy standing next to it, who was a friend of his who owned it. And the guy I was chatting to was there in a very nice E-Type Jaguar. And when I say very nice, I mean very real looking, original looking, not all flash restored over the top. It looked like a nice, well-used car. And I ended up chatting to this gentleman for quite a while, and I'm going to have to look up who he is because he had all sorts of fascinating stories. Um, he saw me looking at the Auburn and came over and was talking to me, and I mentioned that I was more into the pre-war stuff and the older cars. And so we started talking about that, and I mentioned I was building a Riley Brooklands, and he knew what it was and knew somebody who used to own one. And that ended up being a discussion about, he raced in the UK, has owned all sorts of interesting cars, Coopers and Lotuses, and stories about Cords and Auburns and I've forgotten what the other brand was. Lancaster, maybe? Lanchester? I've forgotten. But really, really interesting chap to talk to. Was quite good chatting to him. But the rest of the cars there were an awful lot of Corvettes for some reason. There must have been a club outing. And a lot of modern stuff. And a lot of Japanese type cars, Silvias and Supras and Nissan Skylines, things like that, which are all cool. They're pretty interesting. There were only a couple of hot rods there, maybe one actually, and a lot of just normal sort of cars. Not even that many classics. I think I did see another MG. It was possibly an MG Midget, but yeah, lots and lots of modern stuff. Whole bunch of Ford Ranger trucks, all sort of pimped out, which I don't know. I don't think they look that good standard, and they kind of look even worse modified. It's just not my kind of thing, I guess. But oh well, if that's what people are into, that's all cool. So the problem was, I went there mainly to go to the museum to photograph the Velocette, because I wanted to find out what the missing part of the tail looks like. Basically looks like the back of the front guard. So that'll be easy enough to make. And I was intending to park somewhere where I could get out easily, only I went the wrong direction and ended up parking on the grass. And because I was quite early, it was in the middle, and I couldn't actually leave until quite a few other people had got out first. So that was half the day. But when I got home, I've been staining the doors and the rear half of the frame. They look like rubbish at the moment. So this stain is it's not like paint at all. It's very watery, very thin. You don't thin it down. It soaks into the timber, of course. I think the Metallex protectant makes it a bit harder for it to soak in. So it looks like crap until you've had about 6 coats on it. So I've done, I guess you would call it 2 on this, where I've gone over each of them twice. I've only actually done one side of these. The bottom side isn't done. I may, before I go in, I might flip them over and do a couple of coats on the other side. The rear of the frame, I'll have to do the same. I'll have to do the front separately. And yeah, after effectively, I guess it's 2 coats, because I sort of go around once, come back, go around again. So whether you call that 1 or 2, let's call it 2. I think it's going to need about 6 to get good coverage. So I'll be spending the rest of the week painting things. I think that's how many it took on the front. I think I had to go over it effectively 3 times, going over it a couple of times each time. And it's come up okay. The other thing I did is I made my little door latches. I still need to clean these up a bit. I didn't have any citric acid to pickle these, so I used boiling water and tried to clean as much of the flux off as possible. But you can sort of see how these work now. It fits in there. And then it sits on top of the little spacer block like that, and you can operate the latch. So all I had to do was mill a little flat in there to clear the inside of the lock, and I made these a press fit. I left the bottom a little bit short, so I was able kind of to fill the well up with silver solder and I also put a little touch around the top, so hopefully it's sucked in between there. And by making it a press fit, I was able to adjust the angle on these before I soldered them. I just sort of press them in with the vise, and then just using the spanner here was able to rotate this till it was in the right position, because it's kind of at a 45-degree angle, which when you're looking at a hex gets quite confusing. So the way it lines up is a bit strange, and it has to allow for the slop as well. But I think those will work fine, just little brass handles. If I can clean them up a little bit better, I will probably nickel plate them. And that's really all I've got done for the weekend.